The Daughter of Time, Chapter 15. There was one person you forgot to ask for, Carradine said, breezing in, very gay, some days later, in your list of kind inquiries. Hello, what was that? Stillington. Of course, the worthy Bishop of Bath. If Henry hated Titulus Regius as a witness of Richard's integrity and his own life's illegitimacy, he must still more have disliked the presence of its instigator. What happened to old Stillington? Judicial murder? Apparently, the old boy wouldn't play. Wouldn't play what? Henry's pet game. Out goes he. Either he was a wily old bird, or he was too innocent to see the snare at all. It is my belief, if a mere research worker is entitled to a belief, that he was so innocent that no agent provocateur could provoke him to anything, not anything that could be made a capital charge anyhow. Are you telling me that he defeated Henry? No, oh no, no one ever defeated Henry. Henry put him on a charge and conveniently forgot to release him. And he never came home, he. Who was that? Mary on the sands of Dee? You're very bright this morning, not to say exhilarated. Don't say it in that suspicious tone. They're not open yet. The effervescence that you observe in me is intellectual carbonation, spiritual rejoicing, and entirely cerebral scintillation. Well, sit down and cough up. Was it so good? I take it that something is. Good is hardly the proper word. It's beautiful, perfect, wholly beautiful. I think you've been drinking. I couldn't drink this morning if I tried. I'm bung full up to the gullet's edge with satisfaction. I take it you found that break in the pattern we were looking for. Yes, I found it, but it was later than I had thought. Later in time, I mean. Further on, in the first months, everyone did what you would expect them to do. Henry took over, not a word about the boys, and cleaned up, got married to the boy's sister, got his own attainder reversed by a parliament of his own attained followers, not to mention of the boys, and got an act of attainder brought through against Richard and his loyal subjects, whose service was so neatly made treason by that one day's anti-dating. That brought a fine heap of forfeited estates into the kitty in one go. The Croyland monk was terribly scandalized by the way and at Henry's sharp practice in the matter of treason. "Oh God," he said, "what security are our kings to have henceforth in the day of battle, if their loyal followers may in defeat be deprived of life, fortune, and inheritance?" He reckoned without his countrymen. Yes, he might have known that the English would get around to that matter, sooner or later. Perhaps he was an alien. Anyhow, everything went on just as you would expect things to go with Henry in charge. He succeeded in August of 1485 and married Elizabeth the following January. Elizabeth had her first child at Winchester, and her mother was there with her and was present at the baptism. That was in September of 1486. Then she came back to London, the Queen Dowager, in the autumn. And in February, hold on to everything, in February, she was shut in a convent for the rest of her life. Elizabeth Woodville, Grant said, in the greatest astonishment. This was the very last thing he expected. Yes, Elizabeth Woodville, the boy's mother. How do you know that she didn't go voluntarily? Grant asked when he had thought it over for a little while. It was not an uncommon thing for great ladies who were tired of court life to retire into an order. It was not a severe existence, you know. Indeed, I have an idea it was fairly comfortable for rich women. Henry stripped her of everything she owned and ordered her into the nunnery at Bermondsey. And that, by the way, did create a sensation. There was much wondering, it appears. I'm not surprised. What an extraordinary thing. Did he give a reason? Yes. What did he say he was ruining her for? For being nice to Richard. Are you serious? Sure. In that official wording? No, that's the version of Henry's pet historian. Virgil? Yes, the actual order of council that shut her up said it was for various considerations. Are you quoting? Said Grant, incredulous. I'm quoting, that's what it said, for various considerations. After a moment, Grant said he had no talent for excuses, had he? In his place, I would have thought up 6 better ones. Either he couldn't be bothered, or he thought other people very credulous. Mark you, her niceness to Richard didn't worry him until 18 months after he succeeded Richard. Up till then, everything had apparently been smooth as silk. He had even given her presents, manners, and what-not, when he succeeded Richard. What was his real reason? Have you any suggestion? Well, I have another little item that may give you ideas. It certainly gave me one hell of a big idea. Go on. In June of that year, which year? The first year of Elizabeth's marriage, 1486, the year when she was married in January and had Prince Arthur at Winchester in September with her mother dancing attendance. All right, yes. In June of that year, Sir James Tyrrell received a general pardon on the 16th June. But that means very little, you know. It was quite a usual thing at the end of a period of service, or on setting out on a new one. It merely meant that you were quit of anything that anyone might think of ranking up against you afterwards. Yes, I know that. The first pardon isn't the surprising one. The first pardon? Was there a second one? Yes, that's the payoff. There was a second general pardon to Sir James exactly a month later, to be exact on the 16th of July, 1486. Yes, Grant said, thinking it over, that really is extraordinary. It's highly unusual anyway. I asked an old boy who works next to me at the BM. He does historical research, and he's been a wonderful help to me, I don't mind telling you. And he said he had never come across another instance. I showed him the 2 entries in the memorials of Henry VII, and he mooned over them like a lover. Grant said, considering, on 16th June, Tyrrell is given a general pardon. On 16th July, he is given a second general pardon. In November or thereabouts, the boy's mother comes back to town, and in February, she is immured for life. Suggestive? Very. You think he did it, Tyrrell? It could be. It's very suggestive, isn't it, that when we find the break in the normal pattern that we've been looking for, Tyrrell is there, on the spot, with a most unconscionable break in his own pattern. When did the rumor that the boys were missing first become general? I mean, something to be talked openly about. Quite early in Henry's reign, it would seem. Yes, it fits. It would certainly explain the thing that has puzzled us from the beginning in this affair. What do you mean? It would explain why there was no fuss when the boys disappeared. It's always been a puzzling thing, even to people who thought that Richard did it. Indeed, when you come to think of it, it would be impossible for Richard to get away with it. There was a large and very active and very powerful opposition party in Richard's day, and he left them all free and scattered up and down the country to carry on as they liked. He had all the Woodville Lancaster crowd to deal with if the boys had gone missing. But where interference or undue curiosity was concerned, Henry was sitting pretty. Henry had got his opposition party safely in jail. The only possible danger was his mother-in-law, and at that very moment, when she becomes capable of being a prying nuisance, she too is put under hatches and battened down. Yes, wouldn't you think that there was something she could have done? When she found that she was being prevented from getting news of the boys? She may never have known that they were missing. He may have just said, "It is my wish that you should not see them. I think you are a bad influence on them. You who came out of sanctuary and let your daughters go to that man's parties." Yes, that's so, of course. He didn't have to wait until she actually became suspicious. The whole thing might have been one move. "You're a bad woman and a bad mother. I'm sending you into a convent to save your soul and your children from the contamination of your presence." Yes, and where the rest of England was concerned, he was as safe as any murderer ever could be. After his happy thought about the treason accusation, no one was going to stick his neck out by inquiring particularly about the boy's health. Everyone must have been walking on eggs as it was, no one knowing that Henry might think of next to make into a retrospective offense that would send their lives into limbo and their estates into Henry's kitty. No, it was no time to be over-curious about anything that didn't directly concern oneself. Not that it would be easy, in any case, to satisfy one's curiosity. With the boys living at the tower, you mean? With the boys living in a tower officiated by Henry's men. There was none of Richard's get-together, live and let live attitude about Henry. No York-Lancaster alliance for Henry. The people at the tower would be Henry's men. Yes, of course they would. Did you know that Henry was the first English king to have a bodyguard? I wonder what he told his wife about her brothers. Yes, that would be interesting to know. He may even have told her the truth. Henry? Never. It would cost Henry a spiritual struggle, Mr. Grant, to acknowledge that the 2 and 2 were 4. I tell you, he was a crab. He never went straight on anything. If he were a sadist, sadist, he would tell her with impunity, you know. There was practically nothing she could do about it. Even if she wanted to, she mightn't have wanted to catch that much. She had just procured an heir to the throne of England and was getting ready to produce another. She might not have the spare interest for a crusade, especially a crusade that would knock the ground from under her own feet. He wasn't a sadist, Henry, young Carradine said sadly, sad at having to grant Henry even a negative virtue. In a way, he was just the opposite. He didn't enjoy murder at all. He had to pretty it up before he could bear the thought of it. Dress it up in legal ribbons. If you think that Henry got a kick out of boasting to Elizabeth in bed about what he had done with her brothers, I think you're wrong. Yes, probably, Grant said, and lay thinking about Henry. I've just thought of the right adjective for Henry, he said presently. Shabby. He was a shabby creature. Yes, even his hair was thin and scanty. I didn't mean it physically. I know you didn't. Everything that he did was shabby, come to think of it. Morton's fork is the shabbiest piece of revenue raising in history, but it wasn't only his greed for money. Everything about him was shabby, isn't it? Yes, Dr. Gardner wouldn't have any trouble in making his actions fit his character. How did you get on with the doctor? A fascinating study, but for the grace of God, I didn't think the worthy doctor might have made a living as a criminal. Because he cheated? Because he didn't cheat. He was as honest as the day. He just couldn't reason B to C. All right, I'll buy. Everyone can reason from A to B, even a child, and most adults can reason from B to C, but a lot can't. Most criminals can't. You may not believe it. I know it's an awful come down from the popular conception of the criminal as dashing, a cute character, but the criminal mind is an essentially silly one. You can't imagine how silly sometimes. You'd have to experience it to believe their lack of reasoning powers. They arrive at B, but they're quite incapable of making the jump to C. They'll lay two completely incompatible things side by side and contemplate them with the most unquestioning content. You can't make them see that they can't have both, and any more than you can make a man of no taste see his bits of plywood nailed on the gable to simulate Tudor beams as impossible. Have you started your own book? Well, I've made a sort of tentative beginning. I know the way I want to write it. I mean the form. I hope you won't mind. Why should I mind? I want to write it the way it happened, about my coming to see you and our starting the Richard thing quite casually and not knowing what we're getting into, and how we stuck to things that actually happened and not what somebody reported afterwards about it, and how we looked for a break in the normal pattern that would indicate where the mischief was, like bubbles coming up from a diver way below, and that sort of thing. I think it's a grand idea. You do? I do indeed. Well, that's fine then. I'll get on with it. I'm going to do some research on Henry just as garnish. I'd like to be able to put their actual records side by side, you see, so that people can compare them for themselves. Did you know that Henry invented the star chamber? Was it Henry? I'd forgotten that. Morton's fork and the star chamber. The classic sample of sharp practice and the classic sample of tyranny. You're not going to have any difficulty in differentiating the rival portrait, are you? Morton's fork and the star chamber make a nice contrast to the granting of the right to bail and the prevention of intimidation of juries. Was that Richard's Parliament? Golly, what a lot of reading I have to do. Atlanta's not speaking to me. She hates you now. She hates your marrow. She says I'm about as much use to a girl as last year's Vogue. But honestly, Mr. Grant, this is the first time in my life that anything exciting has happened to me. Important, I mean. Not exciting meaning exciting. Atlanta's exciting. She's all the excitement I ever want. But neither of us is important. The way I mean important, if you can understand what I mean. Yes, I understand. You found something worth doing. That's it. I found something worth doing, and it's me that's going to do it. That's what's wonderful about it. Me, Mrs. Carradine's little boy. I come over here with Atlanta and with no idea about anything but using that research gag as an alibi. I walk into the BM to get some more dope to keep Pop quiet, and I walk out with a mission. Doesn't that shake you? He eyed Grant in a considering way. You're quite sure, Mr. Grant, that you don't want to write this book yourself? After all, it's quite a thing to do. I shall never write a book, Grant said firmly, not even my 20 years at the Yard. What? Not even your autobiography? Not even my autobiography. It is my considered opinion that far too many books are written as it is. But this one must be written, Carradine says, looking slightly hurt. Of course it is. This one must be written. Tell me, there's something I forgot to ask you. How soon after that double pardon did Tyrrell get that appointment in France? How soon after his supposed service to Henry in July 1486 did he become constable of the castle in Guinness? Carradine stopped, looking hurt, and looked as malicious as it was possible for his kind, woolly lamb face to look. I was wondering when you were going to ask that, he said. I was going to throw it at you on my way out if you forgot to ask. The answer is almost right away. So, another appropriate little pebble in the mosaic. I wonder whether the constableship just happened to be vacant, or whether it was a French appointment because Henry wanted him out of England. I bet it was the other way about, and it was Tyrrell who wanted to get out of England. If I were being ruled by Henry VII, I'd sure prefer to be ruled by remote control, especially if I had done a secret job for Henry that might make it inconvenient for Henry if I didn't live to venerable an age. Yes, perhaps you're right. He didn't only go abroad, he stayed abroad, as we have already observed. Interesting. He wasn't the only one who stayed abroad. John Dighton did too. I couldn't find out who all the people who were supposed to be involved in the murder actually were. All the Tudor accounts were different. I suppose you know. Indeed, most of them are so different that they contradict each other's flat. Henry's pet historian, Polydore Virgil, says the deed was done when Richard was at York. According to the sainted Moor, it was during an earlier trip altogether, when Richard was at Warwick. And the personnel changes with each account, so that it's difficult to sort them out. I don't know who Will Slater was, Black Will to you, and another piece of onomatopoeia, or Miles Forrest. But there was a John Dighton. Grafton said he lived for long at Calais, no less disdain than pointed at, and died there in great misery. How they relish a good moral, didn't they? The Victorians had nothing on them. If Dighton was destitute, it doesn't look as if he had done any job for Henry. Was he by trade? What was he by trade? Well, if it's the same John Dighton, he was a priest, and he was anything but destitute. He was living very comfortably on the proceeds of a sinecure. Henry gave a John Dighton the living of Fulbeck, near Grantham, that's in Lincolnshire, on the 2nd of May, 1487. Well, well, Grant said, drawling, 1487, and he too lives abroad and in comfort. Lovely, isn't it? It's beautiful. And does anyone explain how the much pointed at Dighton wasn't hauled home by the scruff of his neck to hang for regicide? No, nothing like that. Tudor historians didn't any of them think from B to C. Grant laughed. I see you're being educated. Sure, I'm not only learning history, I'm sitting at the feet of Scotland Yard on the subject of the human mind. Well, that will be about all for now. If you feel strong enough, I'll read you the first 2 chapters of the book next time I come. He paused and said, Would you mind, Mr. Grant, if I dedicated it to you? I think you had better dedicate it to Carradine III, Grant said lightly. But Carradine apparently did not feel it to be a light matter. I don't use soft soap as a dedication, he said, with a hint of stiffness. Oh, not soft soap, Grant said in haste. A matter of policy, merely. I'd never have started on this thing if it hadn't been for you, Mr. Grant, Carradine said, standing in the middle of the floor, all formal and emotional and American, and surrounded by the sweeping folds of his topcoat. And I should like to make due acknowledgment of my indebtedness. I should be delighted, of course, murmured Grant, and the royal figure in the middle of the floor relaxed to boyhood again, and the awkward moment was over. Carradine went away joyous and light-footed as he had come, looking 30 pounds heavier and 12 inches more round the chest than he had done 3 weeks ago. And Grant took out the new knowledge that he had been given him and hung it on the opposite wall and stared at it. The end of the chapter.